Good morning, Mario. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mario, you are one of the world's most famous leaders in design for newspapers. You have over 4 decades experience and you have worked with over 450 media outlets. One thing strikes me though. Your formal studies are in comparative literature and not design. Nevertheless, you were named the director of Syracuse University Schools of Graphic Arts in 1977, and today you are the newspaper design guru, the world's newspaper design guru. How did this happen?
It's interesting. My background is in my undergraduate degree is in journalism. But for my graduate degrees, I figured that I was always very interested in literature, particularly in Spanish literature and Latin American literature. And I was practicing journalism from the time I was 19. I was working as a reporter with the Miami News and the Miami Herald. But my interest in literature was always there. And I figured that I would go into that for my graduate work. But parallel to that, I was always working with newspapers. But it's an interesting question because I never took a course in design in my entire life. And that is what I have devoted my career to, which shows you that you can learn by doing. But when I was a young reporter with the Miami News of the 1960s, I was covering a lot of stories that had to do with the migration of Cubans into Miami. Obviously, that would bring a lot of sometimes violent news. I mean, the political clashes that the Cubans who came to Miami had, they were trying to settle still vendettas with what had happened in Cuba and so on. I was 19 or 20 years old, but I was the only bilingual reporter. So I could understand Spanish. And they would send me out to do all of these stories. And a lot of these stories were stories that, it was not covering lifestyle. He was not doing an interview with a celebrity. He was covering drama. So I would come back to the newspaper and there would be the designers in those days, they were not called designers, layouters, doing layout of the pages. And to me, that was so peaceful, so nice, such an artistic way of approaching journalism that I would sit hours looking at what they were doing. And eventually I was doing it myself. And so that's how newspaper design got into me. I think in all of my work, I have always emphasized that content is what's important because my background is in journalism. Now I realize that literature gave me storytelling. And so you combine journalism, storytelling, and you're interested in design. And that's what my career has been all about. I hope that explains it.
Very interesting. Mario, would you call yourself an artist?
I don't know if I would go that far. I think that to me, an artist is Salvador Dali is an artist. Van Gogh is an artist. And artists create things that don't necessarily have to convey a meaning immediately. I mean, everybody who watches a Van Gogh or a Dali in a museum or a Picasso is going to attach a different meaning to the work. What we do needs to be meaningful. What we do as visual journalists, we need to make sure that there is a clarity attached to it. I tell my students at Columbia University, where I teach now, that if they do not attach a meaning to what they present in a story, the reader will. And so maybe journalists are artists. I think that you can say that we are in the creative field, but I don't know if I would consider myself an artist. I think that would be a stretch. I consider myself a visual storyteller.
Yeah, so seeing some of your pieces of work, I really thought actually some of them, they could be considered art because they do have a lot of meaning, but they are also beautiful. So this is a comment on the side. I have another question for you regarding your work with newspapers. You are known for your WED philosophy. So writing, editing, design, they play equally important roles. Would you like to tell us more about this method and how does it differ for print or for digital?
Yeah, the wet concept, which is what I call it, is a concept that basically came to me after I had done maybe 45 projects. Now I am on project 749 at this moment, 749. So this happened many projects ago. And I remember clearly that I was working with the redesign of the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is such an iconic newspaper. Benjamin Franklin wrote for that newspaper. So it's a very historical title in the US. And it was a time when that newspaper was going from very black and white and very sort of sturdy kind of look to a more contemporary look in the early 1980s. And I was taken by the fact that on the first day that I went to work on this newspaper, the editor took me into a room and showed me that they had like 13 Pulitzer Prizes, the highest accolade you can give a newspaper for its journalism, on the wall. And he said, before you do anything here, Mario, I want to make sure that you realize that we have a history of good content, of good journalism. This is happening in the 80s when newspapers are still not designed. They're coming into design. The technology allows newspapers to do more with color and all of this. But journalists love to write about change, but they are the last to join it. And so they were not coming into this with a lot of enthusiasm. They knew the newspaper had to look better, but these journalists are still concentrating on what it's all about, content and journalism. And so that project was a landmark moment for me because although I've always been aware of the importance of content, the editor was guiding me in every step. Whatever you do here, remember, we are a powerhouse in journalism. And so one day after 2 months working there, I was flying from one city to the other and, over the clouds thinking, why is this project going so well? And while other projects take longer to materialize. And I realized that it was because writing and editing were a foundation to create the design. And obviously in English, when you put WED together, wed is wedding, is a marriage. And so I started developing this philosophy of the wed concept, which became very popular at that time. Newspapers all over the world follow it. Universities teach this. And I'm very proud that has been the foundation of my work, because there cannot be good newspaper or journalistic design if you don't have good writing and editing before you get into the design. To this day, I teach that now to the new generation. I mean, my students are 22 years old, getting their master's at Columbia. I'm almost 75 years old. And so that concept has outlived decades. It was there before there was internet. And now WED, to answer your question, is more important today than it ever was, because the attention span is shorter. So you have to seduce with very well-written headlines. The first paragraph of the story has to be superb. You're reading this on the phone. You have 4 seconds before you decide, I don't like it, and go on to the next one. So WED not only lives, I think it's more important today than it was when the concept was created in the early 1980s.
Cool. That sounds really like a very good method to use in the digital age. But you redesign also in other media houses like Wall Street Journal, Miami Herald, Handelsblatt, Die Zeit, Paris Match, Salzburger Nachrichten, and Kronenzeitung, and so many others. Yeah, they are really very renowned names. So now you told us about your landmark project before. Which was the project that you were most proud of, and why?
This is like sometimes asking an obstetrician who delivers babies, which was your favorite baby of all of them. I think that I would have to say that there are projects that stay with you because of the difficulty of getting them completed. and also what happens after. And for me, to this day, out of 749 projects, the two most memorable ones are the site in Germany is number one, and number two would be the Wall Street Journal. And there are reasons why. In both cases, you had teams inside the operation who were very good journalists. The content was superb. And in both cases, they felt that the way it was perfect. And here you come in, and I always do the analogy, you are the interior decorator coming into somebody's house, but there are people in the house who feel that everything in that house looks perfect. The furniture is perfect, the color on the walls is perfect, and you are the interior decorator brought in by someone to change that. So you say, well, let's move the chairs here. Oh, no, don't move those chairs. My grandmother left those chairs. We don't want them moved. Let's change the carpet. No, that carpet has been there since my great-grandfather built this house. We don't want that change. And so it becomes a challenge. When you are the agent of change, you know that this is a very iconic, classic operation. And yet, moving the pieces become very difficult. In the case of this site, the year is 1994. This newspaper, and you know this well because you know of your background in Germany, this site is the newspaper of the intellectuals in Germany. And in 1994, it did not have color, it did not have photography. They believed in illustrations and caricatures. So Mario enters the picture with a mandate to introduce photography, to introduce design, to introduce art directors. You are persona non grata in an environment like this. So the progress that was made there, was immense. That newspaper introduced photography, introduced a very classic, beautiful design. It's, you know, it represents what you call German elegance, but you know, elegance anywhere. And then after that, art directors started coming in. The place became very vibrant, and it won time and time again among the best design newspapers in the world. That is a story that, to me, it resonates with me as what can be done if you don't give up, if you really manage to work with internal team, and again, with great writing, great editing, and now design enhancing all of this. Well, the Wall Street Journal, we all know that the Wall Street Journal is an iconic financial newspaper. You know, say Wall Street Journal, and people immediately know what you're talking about. But by now, it's 1998, also no color, mostly graphs. It's a very boring kind of look. And they want to perk it up and to introduce color. With the internal, the editors telling me, Mario, go easy on the color. We don't want to look like a cheap down market newspaper, because that's how editors in those days would see color. If you put color in the newspaper, we are going to be less formal, less authoritative, a newspaper for the masses. Yet color was introduced. It was a big success. We did it all over Europe, all over Asia. And today, when I look at the Wall Street Journal in the street, or maybe sometimes I find it a copy of a printed edition, I look at that color in the What's News column on the front, and I say that was a giant step for design. And now nobody thinks twice about it. So those two are memorable. But at the end of the day, each one of these projects is memorable. I learned in doing all of them, and I'm thankful for that kind of career where, you know, I've been able to work in 120 countries, always respecting the culture, and design adapts to culture a lot. What works in Brazil may not necessarily work in Scandinavia, and you have to respect that. So I never had one model that fits all, never. I always went and started with a blank slate, a blank page, and that's how it developed.
Perfect. So tell me, that brings me to a question that actually I thought about right now when you were talking. Yeah, so starting with a blank page. We heard that newsrooms struggle nowadays quite a lot with the topic of diversity. Can you tell me, there is a link between design and diversity into a media house or into the audience of this media house?
I think that diversity is an interesting topic with newspapers, especially in the U.S., where this is a topic of great interest, and it's not only trendy but a necessary topic. I think many newsrooms, their consideration of diversity is to hire either an Asian writer or a Black writer or a Latino writer, and once they have that, then they complied with diversity. Well, then the Latino writer will be writing about what happens in the barrios, and the Asian writer will be writing about the Asian community. But to really embrace diversity, these newsrooms have to say, from now on, we are aware of what is happening. You don't have to be Black to write about the Black communities. You don't have to be a Latino to understand about stories that resonate with Latinos. But in terms of design, I think that design and culture link, but there are many aspects of design that what one person likes, the other one would like as well. I think that the biggest difference is in the use of color. For example, when I design newspapers in Latin America, one of the first things I do is visit the local galleries. You know, how do the artists in Colombia paint? How do the artists in Brazil paint? But then you realize that even the most sophisticated people in Latin America, for example, embrace bright colors. But then you go to Scandinavia, and I've always done the trip by train kind of thing. You can travel through Norway, through Denmark, by train for 3 hours, going through farmhouses and little towns, and you never see curtains in any color other than white. You know that it's the same in Germany. Curtains are always white. You take a train ride in Brazil from Sao Paulo somewhere, and there will be curtains in green, in yellow, in red. You can, as a designer, you cannot ignore how people approach color. So also in Asia, in India, I worked in all these countries, and I take it all in. You know, you have to realize that the American model is not the model, or the French model is not the model, or the German model. The number of times that I have been in one country and a well-meaning publisher would say, I want you to do here what you did with this site. Well, you know, this is not Germany. This is not an intellectual newspaper read by the intelligentsia. Your newspaper is popular. It's a newspaper for the masses. So I am honored that you like this site, but you can transfer a design from one place to the other. And I think that there have been articles written about me sometimes, but well, Mario Garcia is like a chameleon, you know, this design doesn't look like the other one. I take pride in this. I take pride in the fact that my projects don't look alike, because they shouldn't. You would not survive 52 years in this business if you took one model and transplanted it everywhere. I always begin with a clean slate and see where the pieces fall. And that's what's interesting.
That's nice. That's nice. You mentioned before another things. Yeah, of course, you deal with change, with a deep change process in every redesign project that you have. Do you have a method there to make people accept your ideas, or how do you go against this kind of resistance that goes towards you, or towards the change ideas?
You learn to listen to the people. You realize that this is their newspaper or their magazine. They know more about this publication than you do. I always look at the volume number. If you come into the Wall Street Journal and on that day, the first day you arrive there, it says volume 105. For 105 years, this newspaper existed without Mario Garcia touching it. You have to respect that. You go back. I always say you have to do a handshake with the past, sort of a light handshake, and then a strong hand to pull you to the future. And I think that you have to respect what has been there before. I go into the archives, I read the history of this publication. And then the other thing that always works is the first part of any project. I do not work internally with the art directors or the people who are there. So I am not contaminated by the fact that they've been there 25 years. I work with my team on the first burst of ideas. Once I present those ideas, the project moves in-house. I always tell the clients there are two phases in a project: reality and fantasy and reality. The first stage should always be fantasy. What if? What if we do this? What if we put color there? What if we eliminate this? And then once you present it, in my experience, 75% of all my fantasies in all these projects lived. 75%, because somebody in the group looked at it and said, we should do this. And so that has worked for me. Then once the project comes in-house, I always tell them, I brought you a wet sculpture. This is what my team and I think you should do. But it's wet. You still can move the head to the right, an arm to the left. And that's when then they begin to get ownership of their project. Usually these projects take about 6 to 9 months because you go through a progression. I always go through sketching first, presentation of those sketches, then prototyping, creating what the Germans call a Nullnummer, and then finally the introduction of the new concept. So there are 4 steps that I follow very religiously because they work for me all along. And within that, every project is different. Some people move through the first step very quickly. Others take months to deliberate. And you have to adapt to that. But the idea is to listen, not marry yourself to one idea and say, well, this is my idea and it's the best idea. I would not have survived if I did not listen. And again, a lot of if I had a drawer full of ideas that were not accepted, and I looked at it, I would probably start crying because there were many ideas that my team and I thought were great, but they were killed on arrival for whatever reason. You move on. I always tell my students, take 24 hours to do the crying, the funeral, the burial, and then move on to the next idea. Don't marry yourself to an idea to the point that you cannot advance.
Lovely. I love this one. So now we are going into another topic. So you wrote your books, the story, and you delivered a lot of valuable information on storytelling in the mobile era. Yeah, and I recently read an article of yours about also storytelling in the pandemic age, and you talk about you recommended using cards. Can you tell us more first about the storytelling, your concept about storytelling in the mobile era, and then what are these cards that you were talking about?
Right. I think that the book, the story, which is now available in Spanish as well, is a trilogy. I wrote that book sort of like a man on a mission because I believe that we need to create content that is more specifically created to be consumed in a small platform. And as I explained, I would say 65 to 70% of all the information that we create today, whether you're a bank or a university or a newspaper or a magazine, is created thinking in terms of squares. Square like the screen that I'm looking at in front of me, a desktop, a laptop, or the screen of a computer, or if you are really a little older and thinking print, like the page of newspaper. Yet most people are consuming this information in a vertical format. In other words, people are thinking like this, and the reader is consuming the information like this. So the moment I promote this in the book, the moment I start a workshop with journalists around the world, which I do on a weekly basis on storytelling, reporters are the people I want in that meeting primarily. I said, do not have any square paper in front of you. Fold the paper like this so that you think linearly. Okay. With that comes a different form of writing. If people are scrolling and reading on the phone rings. The phone takes you to email, to Instagram. So there are interruptions. This is the journalism of interruptions. You have to write shorter paragraphs, put subheads in there. And then social cards, which is your question, are my way of migrating ideas from mobile and digital to print and from print to digital. Most people nowadays come into a story through a link. Chances are they've seen that link either in Facebook, in Twitter, in Instagram, and that says a recipe. Oh my God, I saw this wonderful recipe. I want to share it. So you click and you send. The social cards are one way to make sure that you offer more than a link. You can take this card, copy, paste, and send it. And there you also have the branding for this publication. You realize that a lot of branding is lost when people send links, they forget where they got this from. I think there was a study, a Pew Research study, a couple of years ago, where they asked Americans primarily who published this story. And a large number of people say Facebook. Well, Facebook doesn't publish anything, but you read it in Facebook. A friend of yours sent you a link on Facebook, and people think that Facebook is a publisher. It is not. So the social card is a way of taking the link, the summary of the story, and the label that says, this is the Süddeutsche Zeitung, this is Le Monde, and it has worked for me in projects all over the world. I'm a great promoter of social cards. This is, again, part of the WED concept, where the art director works with the editor, with the reporter. These workshops, to me, continue to be sort of a miracle, because you get a group of reporters. Now we do them all on Zoom. I'm hardly traveling at all. And so you get this group of reporters who are still writing stories as if they were going to be published either for laptop consumption or desktop consumption or for print. And in 2 hours, you begin to transform them into how to write for mobile. It's fascinating.
Thank you, Mario. So we were discussing with David before that the past decade was so extremely disruptive for media, but we think what's coming now, it will be even more disruptive. Do you have a vision for the next, let's say, 10 years?
Wow,
Wow.
that we used to do 10-year visions in the past. Right now, I think that 3 years is the most that you can probably move forward. I think that the generation that is right behind, like the generation of my grandchildren, these people are very digitally savvy. They know how to maneuver and navigate around all kinds of digital platforms. And I think that we need to catch up with that. You will see probably more use of artificial intelligence. You will see more virtual reality, augmented reality as storytelling tools. And my vision of that is that we need to catch up with mobile storytelling first. How can we tell stories in smaller platforms? Right now, the smallest platform is the screen of a phone, where 82% of the people are consuming content all day long. The average person comes to a mobile phone 114 times in a day, sometimes to order food, sometimes to get a map. But it's a great possibility for media houses to really introduce their brand. We don't do enough of that, Ayana. We don't do enough of that. The average media house still thinks in terms of editions. Mm-hmm. Let me explain. If you had a weekly magazine, Paris Match, Time Magazine, you deal from Monday to Monday or from Friday to Friday. In the mind of everybody who works there, they are working on an edition that will be a group of stories that come out at a certain time. If you are in a daily newspaper, go from 5 in the morning to 5 in the morning the next day. Well, editions are still there. But in this mobile era, we think in terms of stories. It's 24/7. Some stories have long legs, some stories have short legs, but it's advancing stories not thinking in terms of, even for television, who sits and waits there for the 6 o'clock news, for the 10 o'clock news, but they still have that because that is how news was presented through the ages. A newspaper in the morning, a weekly magazine once a week, a television forecast 2 or 3 times a day. I think that that kind of mentality has to shift. In the next 3 years, we need to see newsrooms that see the stories of the day as what they are following, and people will consume them at different times. It's just like what is happening with television programming. People stream and look at shows whenever they want to look at them. The news business is the same thing. People are constantly connecting. So having said that, one of the things I do with all my clients is to try to create mobile branding. How can you create a symbol where the name of your newspaper or magazine is very easy to catch, very easy to see? Normally, the New York Times would have a T for Times, G for Guardian. Why is that? Because eventually, when print publications are not around and the name is not seen on a printed page, you have created a mobile brand for yourself, small enough that you can put it on a social card anywhere. The story came from The Guardian, the story came from Süddeutsche Zeitung, Die Presse, whatever it is. So these are my missions these days, which is really a far cry from being a newspaper designer. I mean, those days are over because you cannot leave the journalism behind. In all of my workshops right now, I want reporters. They initiate the story. If before they write the story, they're going to write it for mobile devices, that's the beginning. I always say go from small to large, not from large to small. In many media houses, everything is conceptualized large and then dumped into a small platform. Well, if you ever had to move from one big house to a small house, you know that if you're coming from a 3-bedroom house to a 1-bedroom flat, that's going to be difficult to do. It's much easier to go from small to large. So every reporter writes a story first for mobile, then that story has other lives in other platforms, but not the other way around. It's a lot of work to do, but that's how I see the next 3 years. Newsrooms updating themselves, creating a mobile first, not even digital first, a mobile first philosophy. That's what should be coming.
Yeah, absolutely right. But still, a lot of the local media houses are struggling with digital first. Still,
Yeah.
they are not yet at mobile first. Nevertheless, I want to take you a step even further because nowadays there is so much talk about the metaverse, the NFTs, the digital currencies, and all these virtual worlds that are already here with us to stay. And they will change dramatically the way we work and the way we live and the way we are consuming the media. So do you think this virtual world will revolutionize design? And what do you think, how will this development change news media?
Well, first, how it will revolutionize design. Ironically, I think that the design of now and the design of the future, the designing for mobile, for example, is very different from how we conceptualize and design stories for print and even for digital. In the world of mobile, people want familiarity, which means they want templates that are used time and time again. The concept of repetition in design in mobile is a plus. The concept of repetition in print was not a plus. You wanted the food page to look different every week, the entertainment page to look different. That is one big change. We are going to see more the creation of a design one time that is very good, robust, attractive, and functional. And then you have a template, and that creates familiarity for the reader. You don't want to look at your phone and every day there is something different to navigate. That's the first thing. The second is that the emphasis will be more on the storytelling, not so much changing the design, but creating templates where many stories, the number of media houses that do not explore audio and video, they put photos everywhere. Well, because that's the mentality they have. Many people today love to see videos. They love to hear. If instead of using a quote in text, let the chief of the fire department tell you how this fire was in his own voice. And we don't explore this appeal to the senses that is so easy to do in the world of mobile. So I think that design is going to be changed, but the change will be creating very sturdy, good designs that also help with familiarity and with continuity. I think the biggest change is in journalism itself. I I have lived through 5 revolutions in this business. I mean, I started when there was hot type, metal, before cold type. And then I went to the revolution from typewriters to computers. That was a big revolution for the media. Then I went to the revolution of black and white to color. Then came the internet and now mobile. None of those other revolutions affected how you would write a story. That's why, journalists could still write a story whichever way they did. And now there will be a color photo next to it. In today's environment, this revolution that we are going through cuts into the heart of journalism. This is where the problem lies for many journalists, that they need to compose stories differently. And that is not easy for journalists to accept. And I see it in our own journalism school. You have to teach students the fundamentals, how to build a real story. That hasn't changed. But you immediately have to take them on the way we tell stories for mobile, which is the opposite of print. In print, you see images and then you read. In mobile, you read and you see. You read and you see. It's like a WhatsApp conversation. I write and then I show you immediately, and then I continue writing and you scroll through. That methodology of incorporating visual images that become paragraphs, the big revolution, and I tell that to my students, is that forever a newspaper editor, a magazine editor has seen photos as art and text as journalism. In the mobile world, images in the middle of a paragraph become a paragraph by themselves. This is exactly where you say, this is what the fire chief had to say. And then instead of a paragraph with a quote, you have a clip where you hear the fire chief saying. So the whole notion, and I'm exploring this right now because it's difficult to explain. This is something that I'm exploring to write more about, is how can we turn visual assets into journalistic assets in the middle of a story? How do you actually, on the first screen of a phone, have an image that is the equivalent of a good headline that tells you what happened? But there are great newspapers doing good things. In the US, the Washington Post and the New York Times do wonderful, wonderful storytelling with visuals. I think that one of the best examples in the past year was when the Notre Dame Cathedral burned. As a breaking news story, the Washington Post did this live with short clips of videos showing the people looking at this fire and this, iconic cathedral burning. And so we are beginning to do this on real time with breaking news, but 75% of many of the local newspapers are still struggling to become digital. My advice to them, if you did not become digital, skip that and move to mobile. It's easy to do. All right.
Great. That brings me to a quote that of you that I love. You said once, I don't know where, these are the best times to be a storyteller. A lot of people my age lament what was. I celebrate what is. And I think that this is the tenor of you just told me. So the future is really there for storytellers to tell complex story with visual elements, with interactive elements, and so much more.
I think that I maintain that these are the best times to be a storyteller. Can you imagine that you can actually, if you're writing a story these days and you have a phone in your hand, you are the videographer. you are the audio expert, you are the photographer. And so let's say that I'm covering the first day of kindergarten. In the old days, I would have a photographer by my side taking some pictures. In today's environment, I can see that what is happening around me. I can make videos of the children singing. I can see the short video of the teacher in front of the class. I can have audio. This is the way stories were meant to be. And I always do a correlation between children's books and mobile storytelling. Children's books always had elements that were surprising. A pop-up, things will pop up. You will have the narrative, and then suddenly you would say, Little Red Riding Hood came into the forest. Well, there she is. Suddenly there was a big wolf. There is the big wolf. That kind of storytelling that in my book I mentioned in 1926, Winnie the Pooh was already written like this. They were almost written like Instagram images in 1926. This is the way that storytelling has moved. You write and you show, you write and you show. And I always, in my workshops, I always tell the editors, if I were to confiscate your phone right now and look at your last WhatsApp conversation, it will be like this. You write and you show. So why are you writing stories that are very long and then the visuals are all in a photo gallery? Photo galleries are like 15 minutes ago. You don't do photo galleries. You incorporate the visuals with the story. So there's a lot of work to do.
Lovely, lovely. Mario, I would have like 2 or 3 personal questions. I know that you are a very, very busy person, and I see on your social media posts that one day you're in Hamburg, then you are in New York again, then you are in India. And I wonder sometimes, how do you set your schedule to manage so many projects?
I am disciplined. I think that this is what I have done for 41 years. I don't know life differently. I am disciplined. I always wake up early and do a lot of work. I'm a morning person. In the morning, I never let any emails or any questions addressed to me sit in the computer. So I manage the menu in front of me is large, but I manage to consume what I can at different times of the day. And it's organization and discipline. That's it. And not letting emails accumulate or messages accumulate.
So Mario, my next question is about how do you keep yourself updated? So we live in a world where change and technological advancement, they progress at a very fast pace. So do you have preferred books, newsletters, blogs, podcasts that inspire you?
Well, I read, I would say a total, sometimes I read 16, 17 different titles a day. I learn a lot about what is happening by observation, by seeing what the good brands are doing. I also, as a professor, I am in contact with 22-year-olds. Every single day. These are students who don't remember life without Google, and I tell them that I remember life with Gutenberg. And so the connection is, but I think that the lesson here for editors and publishers and designers of a certain age is the role of mentor and mentee has changed. I surround myself with young assistants and young people because they would think in a way that I could never think because I'm almost 75. And so I tell my students, when you get your first job, see if you can mentor an editor. Mutually, you can help each other. But if you're going to work with an editor who is 55 years old, who has been in the newsroom 30 years, that person is going to benefit from you, 22 years old, 23 years old, inspiring and telling them, how things are working today. You do this respectfully. You're working with an editor who has a lot to offer, a lot of experience to help you, but you can help this person by mentioning sources and so on. For example, my assistants sometimes will bring to me websites that I would never visit on my own. But then I analyze them and I write a blog about it. And people always say, how in the world did you ever get to this website? Well, not on my own. I would have never gone there. So I think that it really, it's important that if you are not up to date, you surround yourself with people who will get you to be up to date. I am always very much in tune with uh, technology through magazines. I look at Wired. I look at Axios on a daily basis. I look at the reports from the Guardian, the Washington Post, the New York Times on technology, which are very good. And there is a lot of material to absorb, but there is always something that will tell you this we should be paying attention to. Yeah, it's very rapidly changing, so you have to keep up, and there are the sources there for you to do that.
Yeah, that's great. That is as actually called reverse mentoring, when the young people
Yes.
come to the experienced one and give them the new perspective, a fresh perspective. So that's extremely important nowadays. Thank you, Mario. My last question is also a quite personal one. If a fairy would grant you one wish for your work with newspapers, what would be your wish?
I think that my wish at this point would probably be to do more workshops, not necessarily with designers, but with reporters. I think that I would love to uh, embrace reporting teams in every newspaper and get them to understand how wonderful mobile storytelling can be, because mobile storytelling borrows from cinematography, from radio, from television. It's none of the above, it's all of the above. And I think that writers who take to this not only will benefit their publications, they will benefit their own personal careers, because they will be writing in the style which is easier for people to consume their own stories. So my wish now is to expand my network so that I would be not mentioned as a newspaper designer, but as a visual storyteller and a mobile visual storyteller, and embrace as many reporters as I can in my workshops and classes and so on. That would be my wish.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mario, for your time and for your wonderful insights. Thank you.
Thank you, and let me know how it goes.